Archaeological evidence suggests that before men counted time in years, they counted it in hunger. Not the hunger of the belly, that is a simple beast, but the hunger of the soul for permanence. In the red wadis of Upper Egypt, where the sun brands the skin until it resembles cured leather, the earliest prospectors did not seek gold for its shine. They sought it because they believed it to be the solidified breath of Hathor, the golden mother, whose milk was the flood and whose bones were hidden in the earth. To hold gold was to hold a fragment of the divine intestine, a piece of eternity that digestion could not destroy. This was the first fiction that launched 10,000 ships across the deserts. The texts are unequivocal. Gold was useless. In an economy without coinage, it could not fill the stomach or ward off the spear. Yet the early peoples pierced their own flesh to carry it. Noses split, earlobes distended like empty pouches, heavy shells and nuggets hanging from these self-made wounds. The Sanskrit scholars record that among the Aryans, gold was called Chandra the moon, not for its color, but for its celestial association. The Indus was the golden stream not because of its silt, but because it flowed from the sky kingdom. To modern sensibilities, this appears mere superstition. To the archaeologist, it is evidence of a profound pathology. The moment when utility was divorced from value and beauty became indistinguishable from religious terror. We must understand that these ornaments were not decorative. They were physiological interventions. The woman who wears diamonds today perpetuates a custom rooted in the grossest superstitions of blood regulation and fertility charms. The early texts suggest these metals were believed to govern the flow of humors, to secure luck by binding the wearer to the soul substance of the deities. When Columbus crossed the Atlantic, the natives of the New World laughed at the Spaniards' frenzy for the yellow metal, laughed, and then gave it freely, not comprehending that they were handing over fragments of sacred geology to men suffering from a religious mania that had metastasized into greed. Copper came second. In the pre-dynastic graves of Egypt before 3500 BC, we find it worked into imitation seashells, as if the metal were trying to disguise itself as something organic, something that had grown rather than been torn from the mountain. The magical value attached to the shells, those calcified wombs of the sea, was transferred to the copper, which thus became precious or holy. But copper had a secret that gold did not possess. It could bite. It could hold an edge. Some anonymous genius, some troglodyte of the Sinai, discovered that this avatar of the goddess could be made to shed blood as readily as flint. This was the transition from the age of ornament to the age of cutlery, and it changed the geometry of power forever. The pharaohs understood immediately what this meant. They did not send slaves, they sent armies. The copper mines of the Sinaitic Peninsula became the first industrialized hellscape. King Simirkhet of the early dynastic age dispatched expeditions to Wadi Magara, where the highlands brand the skin in summer and the mountains themselves seem to bleed green malachite. The inscriptions survive, carved into the rock with the permanence that only copper tools could provide. Records of punishment meted out to the Bedouin tribes who dared to resist the extraction. These were not mere barbarians, as the Egyptian scribes claimed. They were the indigenous guardians of the mineland, and they understood that the copper hunters were mining not just ore, but the integrity of the earth itself. An official inscription from around 2000 BC gives us a glimpse into the economics of this suffering. The scribe complains of the evil summer season, noting that the highlands are hot in summer and the mountains brand the skin. Yet he boasts that he extracted more copper than ordered, as if quantity could justify the baking of flesh. This is the voice of the first bureaucrat of the Middle Age, already fluent in the language of extraction and human cost. The mines were not merely workplaces. They were religious sites where the earth was made to confess its secrets through violence. The copper was the earth's blood, and the miners were the phlebotomists of empire. But Egypt was not alone in this hunger. At the head of the Persian Gulf, where the Tigris and Euphrates once poured into an inland sea, the Sumerians established their port of Eridu. Archaeological strata indicate they arrived as seafaring colonists, already possessed of copper tools when they set foot on the alluvial plain of Shinar. The problem was immediate. There was no metal in the mud. The Sumerians looked around at the flat, reedy horizon and realized they would have to import their divinity. Thus began the first long-distance supply chain, a logistical nightmare that would eventually draw miners and merchants across 2,000 miles of mountain and desert. The Sumerian texts are frustratingly silent on where their first copper came from. Some scholars argue for Sinai, suggesting that the battles recorded in Egyptian inscriptions The first occurrence of smiting the Easterners were not mere punitive raids, but trade wars. The Easterners were not barbarians. They were competitors from the Tigris Valley, equally desperate for the green stone. Breasted's commentary on the First Dynasty inscriptions suggests a customary thing for kings to chastise these intruders, but chastisement implies possession. The Egyptians and Sumerians were fighting over the same body, the Sinai Peninsula, which had become the first contested corpse of the Mineral Age. Defeated in the south, or perhaps priced out by Egyptian monopoly, the Sumerian prospectors turned north. Following the Tigris upstream, they entered the Armenian highlands where the earth wrinkles into mountains and the rocks bleed mineral wealth. Here they found copper, though of an inferior sort, soft, yielding, sullying easily. But they also found something else, tin. The discovery is lost to history, buried in some anonymous forge where a smith, perhaps frustrated by the softness of his blades, threw a nodule of gray stone into the melt. The result was bronze, and bronze changed everything. It was the hard amalgam that could split skulls and fell trees, the marriage of copper and tin that produced the ultimate edge. With bronze, the Sumerians abandoned Sinai to the Egyptians. The pharaohs continued in their Copper Age, perhaps out of religious conservatism, perhaps because the ritual value of pure copper exceeded its martial utility. But the Sumerians moved on. They established colonies in the north. Nineveh, that great city of blood, began as a trading post for metal ores. Before the Akkadians arrived, before the Semitic tongues dominated the plain, Sumerian merchants were collecting Armenian copper and tin at Mosul, shipping it southward to fuel the wars of the city-states. The metal workers had become a priesthood of destruction. Their furnaces, the new temples, their bellows, the lungs of conquest. The religious dimension cannot be overstated. In Babylonia, votive images was still cast in copper, not bronze, preserving the archaic connection to the Golden Mother. The famous bull's head from Tello, that masterpiece of hammered copper with its lapis lazuli eyes, represents not merely artistry but theology. The bull was the consort of the great goddess, and copper was her menstrual blood, solidified and sacred. To work copper was to participate in the generative cycle, to midwife the earth's fertility. This is why the miners were protected, why the state invested in their expeditions. They were not laborers, they were fertility shamans drilling into the womb of the world. But the bronze had to travel. The Caucasus Mountains, that great wall between the Black and Caspian seas, became the next mineral frontier. Here, in the high valleys of Armenia and Persia, the ore was different, sulfuric, harder, demanding new techniques. The miners who worked these sites were troglodytes in the literal sense, cave dwellers who followed the seams into the dark. Archaeological evidence shows identical furnace designs from the Caucasus to the Indus, suggesting a shared technological vocabulary spread by these wandering metal missionaries. They carried with them not just tools, but the religious architecture of extraction, the sacred geometry of the forge. The trans-Caspian oases present a mystery. In the lands between the Caspian Sea and the Pamir Mountains, civilizations flourished that were neither wholly Sumerian nor Egyptian nor Indian, yet they possessed bronze and jade in equal measure. The oases of Bactria and Margiana show evidence of Babylonian influence in their architecture, yet their metalwork is distinct, hybrid styles that suggest a melting pot of metallurgical traditions. Here, the copper culture met the jade culture, and the result was a syncretism of stone and metal, hardness polished to an almost supernatural sheen. The Siberian gold rushes began early. Long before the Russian conquests of the 16th century, ancient prospectors pushed north into the taiga, following rumors of nuggets the size of fists in the river gravels. These were not Slavs, but Iranian-speaking nomads, Scythian precursors who carried the metal lore of Persia into the frozen wilderness. They found gold, yes, but also copper in the southern Siberian ranges. The graves of the region, those frozen tumuli preserved by permafrost, reveal mummies tattooed with animal motifs, buried with bronze mirrors and gold plaques that show the same religious iconography seen in Babylon: the tree of life, the sacred bull, the goddess with her lions. Chinese Turkestan, the Tarim Basin, was the crucible where these streams converged. The discoveries at Lulin and Khotan revealed mummies of Europoid features, red-haired and tall, buried with woolen textiles and bronze implements alongside Chinese silk. This was not mere trade, this was colonization by the cult of metal. These were the Tocharians, perhaps, or their precursors, who established the jade routes and the copper routes simultaneously. They stood at the crossroads, holding in one hand the green stone of China and in the other the red metal of the West, becoming the brokers of a geological synthesis that would transform the Middle Kingdom. The jade trade is crucial here. While the West worshipped gold and copper, China had long venerated jade, that hardest of stones, which could only be worked with abrasive sand and infinite patience. But when the bronze workers arrived from the West, they brought a new paradigm: the mold, the melt, the rapid transformation of ore into artifact. The Chinese did not abandon jade, they bronzed it. They began casting ritual vessels in bronze that mimicked the shapes of jade, Kong, and Bi, creating a hybrid material culture that spoke of both stone endurance and metallic violence. The Shang dynasty, beginning around 1700 BC, marks the official adoption of this Western fever into the Chinese body politic. The furnaces of China were identical to those of Europe. This is the fact that haunts the archaeologist. From the Loess Plateau to the Aegean, the same clay-lined pits, the same bellows designs, the same reduction techniques appear simultaneously. Either this is the most extraordinary coincidence in human history, or, and this is the darker hypothesis, the metalworkers formed a secret network, a brotherhood of fire that spanned the continent. They moved along the steppe highways, the same routes later taken by the Silk Road, but centuries earlier carrying not silk but sulfides, not porcelain but the knowledge of how to make the earth bleed. The evidence of ornaments and myths confirms the connection. Chinese bronze mirrors share motifs with Scythian gold, the horror patterns, the animal combat scenes, the stylized trees. The myth of the Great Mother, the Hathor Aphrodite figure, appears in China as the Queen Mother of the West, Shi Wangmu, who dwells in a palace of gold and keeps the peaches of immortality. But she also keeps copper, for the immortals' weapons are bronze. The metal did not merely travel, it carried its theology with it, translating the goddess from Egyptian cow form to Chinese tiger form, but retaining her essential nature as the source of mineral wealth and divine favor. The early metalworking in China was state-controlled from the beginning. Unlike the freelance prospectors of Sinai, the Chinese miners worked under imperial auspices, their labor directed toward the production of ritual vessels for the ancestors. The bronze became a medium of political power, the metal equivalent of the mandate of heaven. To possess the great Ding cauldrons was to possess the legitimacy of rule. This was the final transformation of the copper culture, from religious fetish to political instrument, from the personal adornment of the body to the collective adornment of the state. But we must return to the miners. In every culture, from Egypt to China, the extraction of copper required human suffering. The Chinese texts speak of the mountain opening, the piercing of the dragon's body, as a dangerous act that could disturb the feng shui and release malign influences. The miners were often criminals or prisoners, sent into the earth as punishment. The arsenic vapors of certain copper ores, particularly those mixed with riogar, produced slow poisoning, the skin turning yellow, the nerves deadening. The miners died young, their bones thrown into the slag heaps, their names forgotten, while the bronze vessels they made carried the names of kings into eternity. The culture mixing of ancient times was not peaceful. It was a violent digestion. The Sumerian prospectors did not ask permission to enter Armenia. The Tocharian miners did not trade fairly for their jade. They established monopolies. The spread of copper culture was the first globalization, and it bore all the hallmarks of later expansions: environmental destruction, the enslavement of indigenous populations, the imposition of foreign values upon local geologies. The Great Mother Goddess became a pretext for the rape of the earth, her sacred body invoked to justify the extraction of her literal body, the ore. Yet there is a strange beauty in this horror. The bronze that emerged from this suffering was indeed beautiful, golden, resonant, capable of holding the sharpest edge and the most intricate decoration. The Shang bronzes, particularly the vessels for wine and food, represent the apex of this technological convergence. They incorporated the geometric precision of Mesopotamian metalwork, the zoomorphic power of Siberian shamanism, and the jade-like polish of Chinese stoneworking. They were, in their way, the first truly international art form, the product of 1,000 miles of trade routes and 10,000 crushed lives. The links between China, Iran, and Siberia were maintained by the Metal Road, a precursor to the Silk Road that carried not luxury goods but raw materials and technical knowledge. The Parthian shot, the Scythian arrowhead, the Chinese halberd, all were cousins, descended from the same metallurgical ancestors. The nomads of the steppe were not merely barbarian raiders, but the postal service of the Bronze Age, carrying ingots and ideas from the Altai Mountains to the Yellow River. They rode horses that were shod with bronze, wearing armor of bronze scales, spreading the culture of the furnace across the grasslands. In the end, the copper reached China not as a conquest, but as a conversion. The Shang kings adopted the metal not because they lacked weapons. Stone and jade had served for millennia, but because they recognized in bronze a technology of permanence that matched their own imperial ambitions. The bronze inscription was harder than bamboo, more prestigious than silk. The bronze vessel lasted longer than the dynasty that cast it. This was the ultimate value of the metal. It outlasted memory, it outlasted regret, it outlasted the hands that mined it, and the backs that broke carrying it. It was, in its cold way, immortal, so the covenant was sealed. From the waters of Egypt to the lowest of China, the chain remained unbroken. The miners died, the empires fell, the religions transformed, but the bronze remained. In the final accounting, the archaeologists must admit that we are still living in the age of copper that began 6,000 years ago. We have merely changed the ore to wire, the sword to circuit. The hunger remains the same. The desire to extract from the earth something permanent, something divine, something that will outlast our brief and burning lives. The covenant continues. The furnace never goes out.